Hello, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Linet. Paul is the founder and president of 3i Housing of Maine, which is building affordable and accessible housing in that great state. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's start right with it. What is 3i Housing of Maine and what are you building?
Well, 3i Housing of Maine is a 501c3 nonprofit in the where we've been in existence for about 3 years, and we're very pleased to be at the precipice of our first affordable, fully accessible housing project in Greater Portland, Maine. It's built upon the premises of our name. The three I's are independent living through innovative technology in an inclusive, integrated home and community-based setting. And we're very, very pleased to be at this juncture in a time when, as we all know, affordable housing is a crisis, and more so with the need for accessible housing.
So, how many units are you building?
We're planning on building 50 units in a four-story building, and we're already getting inquiries from individuals throughout the greater Portland area. And our expectation is that, once we get open and get our model in place, we'll be able to replicate it in as much as other communities in the state, having heard about what our plans are, have already made inquiries to say, hey, we see the need and we'd love for you to come to our community.
So is it going to be a leasing model where all the units are rented out?
It will be an affordable housing leased complex, yes.
And so people who take residence, will they have uh when you say affordable housing, will they have the opportunity to use either Section 8 vouchers or some other kind of financing to make the rents more affordable than market value rents?
For sure. We're in the process now of discussing the allocation with various holders of the Section 8 vouchers, and we're also meeting and in discussions with our state housing authority. So we're
Wow.
looking forward to getting some of those details fine-tuned, but absolutely. We understand that, quote unquote, in this day and age, affordability is a moving target.
Absolutely. Have you guys started construction yet?
No, we have not. We're in the process of working with the local community. This is going to be built in a new master development of 560 some odd acres on the site
Wow.
of a former harness race track. And so a town center with all the amenities that you can think of for work, play, recreate are going to be occurring in this new community. And the master developers are really excited about our being an integral part of the town center. So it's really a sort of a win-win situation. The community is taking shape, and they have to understand that we and our residents are going to be valued participants in building something special in Southern Maine.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, when you develop something that's part of a big planned community, the you don't have to worry about NIMBYism, first of all, in built up areas that a lot of people I've spoken with over this show on the show have had to deal with. But before we get into the bigger plan, and it raises all kinds of other questions for me. Before we go there, what is your target date for when you'll be able to start leasing units? People will be able to take occupancy. What's your target?
Well, we hope to break ground late in 2023. We have the architects and the engineers hard at work right now. As I said, there are some permitting processes that we're engaged with. And then it would be a 16-month lead time, according to the general contractors that we're working with. So, we're actively involved in the pre-development stage. Our co-developer, who is a nationwide affordable housing organization, has made a significant commitment for the upfront costs. And our effort is now to really weave together some of the social determinants of health so that we can demonstrate that a better healthcare outcome will occur for our residents who are folks with physical disabilities, and to do that in a way that obviates the need for such folks to be institutionalized and therefore save the system and the public coffers money in so doing.
Wow, that raises all kinds of interesting questions as well. And I just don't think we're gonna have enough time for me to ask you all my questions. So I'll just start. Um, First of all, I love the idea of it being part of a big master planned community. And I know that you want to have a focus. Well, let's just first talk about the units themselves. Are all of them going to be functional and accessible, or are only some of the units going to be
No,
accessible?
this is one of the basic premises. We want this to be no age restriction. People can age in place, but it is going to be constructed under principles of universal design, so
Wonderful.
that it will be planned for wheelchair access throughout the building and throughout the individual units. And then we are going to be applying real individualized technology solutions in order to address specific needs of individual residents.
Wow. Okay, I want to get into that. But before I do, one of the things that I've had happen in previous discussions on the show, I've interviewed people who are they raise the issue of community accessibility, not just a building's accessibility. Does the master planner that you're working with to develop community, are they sensitive to the needs of these folks to be able to access all parts of this development and not just the units or the building you're going to build?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and we're very fortunate to have a team that we're working with from the master development side that is cognizant of the importance of addressing the issues as you just framed them up. And indeed, we have retained a ADA plus architect to make sure that we're addressing those kinds of needs from our side of the house. And the master developer has embraced that, so much so that one of the principles of the master developer came up at a recent site visit and told me about the epiphany he had when last summer he was in a motorcycle accident, and as he was being carted off on a stretcher, he realized how important the 3I housing project is to the community that he's putting together, because in an instant he could very well have been a potential resident in the building that we're constructing.
So, share with me more a little bit about the technology piece. You mentioned about wanting to have people being able to age in place and how important technology was. Can you give me some idea of what you're thinking about with regard to technology?
Well, I think that the reason behind my insistence on working with people who are focused on technology is reviewing the lens through which I spent a considerable amount of time as a family caregiver to my late wife, who had a neurological disease. And at one point during the course of the 25 years that we were addressing specific needs that we had in our own environment, we went through the normal kind of what I would consider upheaval when a diagnosis is presented in young adult life to an individual. And so we were living in a house that wasn't accessible. We tried to find a way to adjust it and to make it accessible. That didn't work. We had to build a new house from scratch and put in all of the systems that were appropriate. And then we still suffered because though we had a one floor arrangement living environment, we weren't able to address the transfer needs of a person who depends on a wheelchair. Um, as a result, while I was out of the house one day, I believe it was work or something, I can't really recall, the personal care attendant who was on duty unfortunately dropped my wife in a
Oh my
transfer.
God.
And my
Oh,
wife weighed all of about 118 pounds. So I came back to find my wife on the floor, and an emergency room trip and a broken leg ensued, and all of the travails that occurred. So one unfortunate incident, and it was a terrible thing to have to go through. Um, but immediately thereafter, we installed a lift system in the ceiling so that from the bed to the shower to the commode, there would be a safe mechanical device. Um, we're planning on those kinds of systems in each of the apartments that are so required. But we're also finding technology that is in development that will reduce the need for direct care workers through what you might consider to be a station to station sort of autonomous wheelchair that would enable a person on his or her own decision making to give instructions to the device to make the mobility work, and even so far as to provide a automatic hygiene directed by the recipient rather than having to rely upon a caregiver to do such things. So those
wow.
technologies are really taking off, and we've been very, very focused on integrating the various speech-enabled and even eye detector kind of for folks who are vocally challenged, in order to enable them to exercise more autonomy in their own environment. You know, if you're a younger person, and we've gotten inquiries along the lines of, hey, I'm 27 years old. I was in a catastrophic car accident. I'm living in a dilapidated mobile home. The state will pay for me to go to a nursing home. I don't want to live in an institution for decades. What can I do to change that? And our answer is technology is one of the ways that can be braided together to enable people to exercise their right to live under circumstances that they should choose, rather than
Absolutely.
being warehoused in an institutional setting, which we know as a result of COVID can be a terrible ordeal, if not downright potentially, debilitating.
Yeah, and all over the country, we've seen deinstitutionalization for people with physical and other disabilities. I did want to mention that I've done some shows on this podcast about the whole move towards remote services and
Uh-huh.
enabling technology. There's some really exciting work going on this in certain states. In Tennessee, the government is very much involved in enabling technology services, and there are several small for-profit companies that are building networks, some of them call center like, and some of them less like that, to provide support for people to be able to live more and more independently. So I'm excited to hear that you've got this on your radar too, because it's very exciting with what the ability for people in the future to live independently. But I wanted to ask you about inclusivity. You mentioned inclusivity. Can you tell me what that means in the scope of this project? What do you mean by it being inclusive?
Well, I think that inclusive and integrated are sort of words that have been used in different contexts. One of the things that we're focused on is um, integrating a service, enhanced service coordination function, so that rather than a patchwork quilt of different kinds of services, there would be a menu that we will have available for people to choose from, and take some of the burden off of an individual from having to track down different kinds of benefits to which he or she are entitled. At the same time, when we speak about inclusive, we're talking about, in the context of our location, being accessible to the social environment where people could work. This community that we're speaking about is a mixed use of master plan development, where there are shops, restaurants, employment opportunities, educational opportunities. And so right across the street from our site, there is going to be all sorts of ways to be civically engaged. And we want also to be a resource for the community as a whole, and to welcome other members of the general community into the building. And I'll give you an example. If you're an individual who depends upon a wheelchair and the wheelchair breaks, then you're at the whims of getting the insurance company potentially to approve the repair, and you could wait weeks for the chair to be brought back up to speed. And what we're looking to do in our building is establish something called the Mobility and Assistive Technology Hub, in which we will have a 3D printer to assist in repairing the wheelchair, and also making the services available to others in the greater Portland area, so that they too can access what we're trying to do, which is, back to the technology, serve as an incubator for other entrepreneurs who want to tap into a really growing market for assistive technology. We've gotten inquiries, Stephen, from Canada and elsewhere, who say, hey, we've got something we think that would be of use and value. And I'm drawing upon my former career as an international trade attorney to make those connections.
Oh, wonderful. So, I know there are models. So when I think about inclusivity, I also think about social aspect of it, that people who live in a community can not necessarily have to go very far, and people from outside the community itself can come in and do social things. There's a model I profiled on the show last summer called Main Street in Rockville, Maryland. I'm not sure if you know about that. Do you envision your building having that kind of social and wellness component to it as well?
Well, I think the opportunities are limitless. So the short answer is yes. To give you a specific, we have a number of connections here in Maine with adaptive outdoor recreational opportunities. And they really take hold for a lot of the population. We have a gentleman here who has been going out and making hiking trails accessible. He uses a wheelchair and has got a database to assist folks to find the best locations for their particular needs and desires. There are boating opportunities, there are biking opportunities. I mean, it is truly a dawning of a new era, I think, recognizing that there are 61 million Americans who have a disability. And so the fact that we're 32 years past the Americans with Disabilities Act, and yet there is still people struggling to find the basics, which is an accessible home, is by itself a national disgrace, I believe. And we want to change that. There's an old maxim that came out of the 1840s that as Maine goes, so goes the nation. Well, we want to be the leader in accessible, affordable, supportive housing. And we're planning on, making this a statewide event, and looking forward also to replicating it elsewhere, in
Wow.
the region, in the Northeast and beyond.
So I want to ask you about, so I've interviewed a lot of people who have development projects that are geared towards people with IDD and developmental disabilities and the autism community. Sometimes those communities that have been developed are not specifically focused on physical access, although they want these units to have physical access because a component of people in the IDD and DD world have physical disabilities. But your project doesn't seem to be focused in that world, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that. Is there already plenty of housing projects going on for people in on the spectrum, or have you had any? Is there any collaborative? Anyway, I just wanted to get your comment about that.
Well, I think that we start back from the basic premise, which is, affordable housing is a national crisis.
Yeah.
I attended a session at the Harvard School of Design about a month ago, and there were representatives from an international contingent. And this is a worldwide issue for affordable housing, and in particular with people with disabilities of all sorts. There are 1 million people in the world with disabilities. So the challenges that we're seeing locally, you can go on YouTube and you can see a gentleman in a wheelchair who lives in a flat, in the UK, and he's going through his garden to the next door neighbor's nursery so that he can use the shack that's adjacent there in order to use the bathroom. Um, in Maine, we've had people with cerebral palsy, who have been in not as dire circumstances, but not that terribly dissimilar. So there is a dearth, an absolute, dearth of accessible housing that will meet the needs of people with mobility impairments and other disabilities. We expect that we were going to be oversubscribed. In other words, if we have 50 units, we anticipate that there are going to be many more applicants, and it's almost going to be a requirement to, be a, a Solomon in waiting to try to figure out how to split the baby.
Yeah.
Not really sure how that will work yet, and we need some guidance, quite frankly, from the community to sort of help us with that. I can tell you that there was a 36 unit, this totally accessible, affordable housing building that opened 2 years ago in the Boston area. 36 units. They had 2,000 applicants.
Yeah.
So I believe that, as a threshold question for our building, we would like to make sure that, the set asides that we see in typical publicly financed housing units, where 5% of the inventory has to be accessible, and you find out when you peel back that onion that those units are actually not being used to house people with mobility impairments. Rather, those folks go back in a waiting list, and so we want to change the paradigm and say we need to have at a baseline, folks with these specific needs, having an opportunity to live on their own in an environment that they can manage with the assistance of these supportive services that we're speaking with and the technological advancements.
So this is a big, big project, and I think you were telling me it's going to be the first of its kind in Maine, that there isn't anything like this in your state. What I want to ask you in the few minutes we have left is, why are you doing this? Like, you are not a person who is living with a disability yourself, and I know that you may be, and I'm hoping I'm sure your wife's story is part of what driving you, but you're talking like 3, 4 year, maybe 5 years of your life. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your your passion for this, why this is so important to you.
So, Stephen, I think when we first spoke, I told you that I was a baseball nut. And when thinking about that very issue, I reflect upon the Jackie Robinson and the legacy that he left. And on his tombstone, it says the measure of a person is the impact that he or she has had on other lives. And it, at one point during the course of the journey, with my wife of blessed memory, a neurologist that we were consulting with um, pulled me aside and said, you know, a person with your wife's deficits, he used the word deficits, um, normally would be placed in a nursing home. And my wife was all of 38 years old at the time. And the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And I said to him, not on my watch. And though my wife Susan did not live as long as we all would have liked, her impact was most significant, and it still applies, 6 years after she has passed. So when I looked at what I wanted to do in my quote unquote retirement, it was to apply my skill sets to pick up some of the work that she had done, because I pulled out a 2008 report in which she participated under the governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Home and Community-Based Services. And it says that we need to build more housing, and we need to make sure that the services are integrated so that people can, reside in the community and with their families. And when I see a headline in the local paper that says a family is living in a rest stop on the Maine Turnpike because they can't find housing that is accessible for one of the family members who is disabled, that's all the reason I need to continue to move forward. And so each day it's how can we advance the ball? And last point on the baseball
Yeah.
analogy, a wonderful social commentary by George Carlin, the comedian. When asked what was the purpose of baseball, he says, well, you just want to make sure that you're safe at home. And isn't that what we all want to do? We want to round the bases, and we want to do our best to do so safely. And we want to be at home where we're cared for and loved with our members. So that's what it's all about.
I don't think anything more needs to be said. I want to thank you, Paul, so much for your time today. If people want more information, I know there are a lot of people around the country who are developing projects and trying to figure this way to get this to happen in their own communities with their different communities of interest, different clientele. Um, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, it's just go to our website. It's www. The number three, the letter I, 3I, home, HOME.org. And we are connecting with similar organizations that are popping up and are looking to get a whole shift from the old rules, which are biased towards institutionalization and making a difference in the communities in which we all live. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for your time.
Bye now.